how you became Chief Operating Officer. What was the journey like growing through the organization?
Wow, that's quite a story. I joined VMware when the company was really small, about 200, 250 people, probably about 20 million in quarter in revenue. By way of comparison, today we are over 10 billion in revenue and about 30,000 plus people. It was 2003. I joined as the product manager for our lead product at the time, our core hypervisor product, as it was called. And clearly, the product was tremendously successful. And then over time, I progressively ran a lot of product management, product marketing, business development type functions, and was part of the management team that took the company public. In 2008, when Paul Meritz came from Microsoft, he turned the company into two divisions. I ended up getting the opportunity to run our server business unit, as it was called at the time, which was the main server business. And over the next 3-4 years, not only were we successful in growing the business, but our team and I incubated several new businesses in networking and storage and management and et cetera, all of which contributed to, if you will, Act 2 of VMware. Act 1 of VMware was the pure server business. Act 2 was us broadening into serving all these data center areas. And all these businesses are over $1 billion each now. And so I think this business success was a big part of why I got the opportunities that I got to become the COO in 2017. When Act 3 was taking us into the cloud, and my current CEO, asked me to lead that effort. So I think that's a quick career arc for me. And some of the things I think that have worked in my favor, firstly, of course, like anybody else that is successful, it's about getting these opportunities. That's number one. Number two, I would say, is I was really able to, along with a team of folks, contribute to creating significant new value for the company. Open up a significant new growth vector for the company that, of course, unlocked a significant shareholder value. And doing that in a way that built upon my deep product expertise, that was my brand within the company, but doing it in a way that I was able to pull people from across the company, doing it in a company-wide fashion, not just in a functional fashion. I think these were two of the elements that I think were probably critical to my success as I think about it. And if you're starting out your career today, clearly you won't have those kind of opportunities, but you will have a lot of great opportunities. But what I would say is build up a core deep expertise in one functional domain. That's one. Really ask yourself, how am I contributing to creating significant new value for the company? And then how am I able to work across functions and domains and pull people together collectively to drive the company forward? I think these are some of the elements that I think, regardless of where you are in an organization and how advanced you are in your career, I think these are all true.
In your view, is it really destiny that most companies will face the innovator's dilemma at some point?
Yes. So here is the good news, right? You won't face the innovator's dilemma if you're a bad company, okay? Innovator's dilemma applies if you're a successful company. And that's what was so revealing about the book when it first came out. And so whenever it is, not more than 20 years ago, it still, the key point about innovator's dilemma is as companies become successful, the managers and the leaders in those companies choose to drive new growth by focusing on their profitable customers, right? That are going to drive growth and customers that look like them. And most of the company's resources, either consciously or unconsciously, get directed that way. And that is the rational thing to do, right? And as a result, the company's sales team says, hey, here are our best customers, and here is how we can do even more for them. The product managers say, look, the number one rule is listen to your best customers. And so they listen to their customers, and the engineers are excited about building something that the customers are going to use and get benefit from. As a result, you leave yourself exposed to two types of disruption. from underserved or unserved customers. One type of disruption, of course, is when the disruption from the low end. Because you're serving the best customers, you often overshot the lower end of the market, and therefore some disruptors can come in at the lower end. And in many ways, that's easier to deal with. It of course requires you to do certain things that are non-intuitive, but it's easier to deal with. The harder one to deal with is the disruption by a company that targets non-consumers. Non-consumers that look, in other words, very different than your current best customers, right? And they build something that is tailored to them, and they have a business model that is tailored to them, and they have an approach that's tailored to them. That is really difficult to counteract, because that's where the dilemma comes in. Do you put your extra dollar in serving your current customers, or do you do something for these new non-consumers that are not going to be very profitable for you? In fact, the market size itself is going to be very small, and it might require a different set of DNA and tactics to deal with, right? So that, in a sense, is the dilemma. You don't, like I said, you don't face it if you're not serving successful customers, and if you're not growing, nobody's going to look at that market as worthy of entering and competing with you.
Would love to hear from your personal experience, any specific examples when you faced this dilemma and how you dealt with it. Given as CEO, you have to be at the forefront of driving innovation in the company.
Yeah, yeah. Over my stint at VMware and during our company growth, I would probably point to three instances. Uh, Two instances are sort of complete. The third one is work in progress. The third one is the most difficult one. So let's talk about each one of these, right? The first one is an example of a low-end disruption. This was back in 2005, 2006, 2007, when clearly we were successful. We were growing like a weed, and competition came in the form of open source equivalents of our product, our hypervisor, right? And in fact, another big company, Microsoft. And the premise was very straightforward, which is, hey, we've got a product that's going to be like 1/6 or 1/10 the price of VMware's product. It doesn't do everything that it does, and specifically around open source, right? And by the way, it's open source, etc., right? So that is a classic disruption from the low end, if you read the Innovator's Dilemma book, right? But the way we dealt with it was actually we took our product, took the core of our product, and literally made it free overnight, okay? And so that was obviously a tough decision to make, but on the other hand, it was not super tough because we knew the customers that really bought into our technology wanted a lot more things than just the core innovation, right? So from that point of view, it was not as much of a risk, but by the same token, it was still a very significant risk to say the very core of what defined you as a company and made you successful, you're going to take and make it free, right? And we were able to use it to literally create a scorched earth policy around the moat. I mean, that was the moat that we built around our core enterprise product, if you will, right? And that worked very well. So that was one example. The second example was when we actually applied Innovator's Dilemma to two other mature markets, the networking and the storage market, right? What we did was we said, look, we'll take the same principles that we were successful with taking the hypervisor, what it did to the server industry, we'll do it for the networking and the storage industry. Turn those things into software instead of hardware, right? Typically, just like the Innovator's Dilemma describes, we started with non-consumers, which are consumers of server virtualization. We said, hey, why don't you consume networking as well, instead of going to your networking team to get networking resources or storage resources, right? And then build it out from there. It was a different business model, a software business model compared to a hardware business model. So this was a classic Innovator's Dilemma play, right? And we used it to disrupt companies that were our partners, and in fact, our parent company. Cisco was one of our closest partner to us. And a lot of the networking companies was our partners. We used it to disrupt that industry. And similarly, storage, we were owned by a storage company. 80% of VMware was owned by a storage company, even though we were a public company, right? EMC, and we were able to disrupt storage. So I would say those are successful examples of where we applied those principles.